managed to put this conference on, and they're backstage, downstairs right now, making sure that we're all here and that we're able to have this conversation. So I want to say thank you to all of the teams from CAP, from IPPR and Labour Together who've made this happen, and in particular, they won't be here to hear me say this because they're all busy, but Jess, Aleri, Ollie, Rhiannon and Ali have done an amazing job in making this happen, so they're the real stars of the show here today. Thank you all, I hope you have a great day, and I'm going to hand back over to Alita.
Welcome again, everyone. Now we're moving on to our next session on the AI dilemma. AI, of course, is not just about technology or the revolutionaries around it. It's about power, democracy, and whether people can trust that progress won't leave them behind. So on our panel today, we have Alexandra Geese, member of the European Parliament who helped shape the EU's landmark Digital Services Act. We have also got Farida Bedway, a Ghanaian entrepreneur and disability advocate whose fintech innovations have brought digital banking to thousands. We also have Emma Lopez Araujo, Spain's Federal Secretary for Economic Policy and Digital Transformation, leading efforts to embed AI in industrial strategy. We also have Tim Wu, a Columbia law professor. He's visiting Oxford, and he's a former White House advisor and the thinker who coined net neutrality. And guiding the conversation, we have Megan Shahi from the Center for American Progress. Over to you, Megan.
Good morning. Can folks hear me? Yeah. Awesome. Well, I hope everyone is sufficiently caffeinated and ready for this conversation. I get the great honor of kicking off our public programming for the day, so thank you all for being here. The session title is The AI Dilemma, Governing for a Digital Future. And I think we're at a really pivotal moment in society as progressives, and really at the intersection of democracy and the choice on choosing democracy going forward for our future, and the advent of technology, particularly with the way generative AI and AI has really come onto the scene and blown up in a very big way. And so today I'm honored to be guiding this conversation. I'm surrounded on all sides by the real experts who I'll introduce in a minute. But the big question we're really seeking to answer here is, how do we govern AI as progressives in a way that protects people, strengthens the economy, and simultaneously prevents and mitigates the far-right authoritarian regime and the risks to the way we really see AI thriving in the future, and how to manage those risks and also simultaneously manage the opportunities, of which there are many. So with that, I will introduce our panelists, and we'll get things started. So to my right, we have MEP Alexandra Geese, hailing from Germany. Ms. Geese is a leading digital policymaker within the European Greens, who played a key role in developing the EU's Digital Services Act, or DSA. She sits on the Industry, Budget, Internal Market, and Women's Rights Committees in the European Parliament, and is a prominent voice on international and social issues. To her right is Farida Bedwi. Ms. Bedwi is a leading tech entrepreneur who co-founded Logicel Limited and pioneered the development of GCoody, a cloud-based banking platform now widely used by microfinance institutions across Ghana. She's on the board of Ghana's National Communications Authority, previously worked as a principal software engineer at Microsoft, and is currently a platform product consultant at Digital Opportunity Trust, where she's part of the team building and managing digital systems that support innovation and youth engagement across Africa. To my left, we have Emma Lopez. Ms. Lopez is the Spanish Federal Secretary for Economic and Digital Transformation and deputy spokesperson of the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party. She's advised successive prime ministers and has been central to setting the country's strategy on economic, industrial, and digital issues. And lastly, on the far left for me is Tim Wu. Tim is a professor at Columbia Law School, the former special assistant to President Biden for technology and competition policy in the Biden-Harris administration, and now visiting at Oxford. He coined the phrase net neutrality in 2003 in the White House and was hailed as the architect of the administration's anti-monopoly agenda. Lastly, he authored the forthcoming book, The Age of Extraction: How Tech Platforms Conquered the Economy and Threatened Our Future Prosperity. So with that, quite the bios. We'll dive right in, wasting no time. So I will open with a high-level question that I would love all our panelists to really start with. Enmo, we'll start over with you. What is the biggest challenge that progressives, folks in the room and out of the room, face in governing AI? And how do we tackle that challenge in a way that not just doesn't just consider policymakers, but also considers people?
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for giving us this amazing opportunity to talk about probably one of the key topics of these times. From my perspective, the big deal is not falling into the false dilemma between advancing and regulating. They are not opposite, and in our perspective, they must be together. Why so? Because if we have rules in the real life, why don't we have that in the digital life? Do we really want the digital life to become some kind of the Far West? We don't. But actually, we cannot deny the advance. We need to embrace it. And to embrace it, we have also to create public policies that doesn't leave anyone behind. That has been on the mind of the Spanish government during all those years. For us, it's very important not only to create like the material conditions for AI to develop, for instance, 5G in almost the full territory of Spain, but also this high-speed velocity broadband. It's right now in the 95% of our territory, but also giving grants to all these small companies. The 95% of our companies are really, really small. We call it pymes. And giving them the opportunity to also embrace that technology. And also we're talking about rights. We have passed this digital act with rights, and not only we've created an agency to protect and to preserve all those rights. We are talking about digital disconnection, we are talking about neutrality, we are talking about things that in real life are so clear, but they must be also in the digital life. So as a sum up, that could be that we need to embrace it, we need to regulate it, and we need to advance in that sovereignty, not only in language, that of course is important, but also in terms of chips, in terms of semiconductors, in terms of all these algorithms and the data that is going to rule the next years of our lives.
Thank you. Tim, we'll turn to you.
Sure, thank you. It's great to be here. I think this conference has been great and very inspirational and motivating, so thank you again for having me on this panel and being here in general. I think the rise of artificial intelligence does pose significant challenges for the progressive movement, and I'll say why. I think it's very important for progressives that we remain a movement that is serious about the future, serious about growth, optimism, building an economy, and no one wants to be in the country that's left behind.
Exactly.
On the other hand, I think we do have to learn from some of the lessons of the last revolution, of the internet revolution itself. The promise in that time, thinking back to the 90s and the early thousands, is that the internet was going to make everybody rich. It was very simple. Didn't matter where you go. Geography was no longer going to matter. Doesn't matter where you were, everybody was going to make it. Because you could work from home, you could invent an app, you could do this, you could do that, you could do this. 30 years later, we look back, and in fact, there was an acceleration of the process of winner regions and loser regions that was accelerated by the internet. And when you think about it, what happened was that mainly the returns went to the platforms, mainly in the United States, mainly on the coast. And the rest of the world, and where I live or lived in most of the United States, got a lot of great stuff, was able to buy things quickly and so forth, but didn't reap the same kind of returns. And so I think as the AI revolution goes forward, I think we have to have that example in mind. And we have to think about a kind of building that builds the entire economy, not at the expense of parts of the economy. Frankly, I think voters are attuned to this. I mean, voters are more skeptical of AI than they are of the internet. People are just actively worried about having their jobs replaced. So I think thinking through the economics is really important. I don't think we should want our countries or our regions to become satellites of Silicon Valley, economic satellites of Silicon Valley, nor do I think you want a situation where that you're competing with tax breaks or whatever you can to try to beg for little crumbs of investment. I think if you want a tech industry, you need to have a tech industry. I think if you want to have AI, you have to have AI. But depending on this model, of hoping to lure a little bit of investment is, I think, a risky proposition if you look at the history of the internet in the last 30 years.
Thank you, Tim. Alexandra, we'll turn to you.
Well, I think what we have tried to do is look at AI as a technology. And what AI is today is a power structure. It's an enormous power structure. Just let me give you two examples. I think the first one is the monopoly on information that large language models now have. If we increasingly use those large language models to produce text, that text goes to the internet. This is what AI models are trained on. You see how big the influence is. And we're already seeing that, for example, NewsGuard showed that there was a Russian disinformation campaign that produced text just to train AI models, and 30% of that material spreading disinformation about the war against Ukraine in Russian and Ukrainian language ended up in those large language models, in those AI chatbots. There are other examples from Elon Musk even being proud of saying, well, we tweak the algorithm, we change the output of Grok. So if you control the global knowledge production, this is pure power. And we see in the US the attack on universities, the attack on teachers, the attack on education in general. This is a global effort to reduce knowledge, to reduce the access to objective knowledge and to control the knowledge production. The second point is that AI is an infrastructure. It's about data centers, it's about satellite, it's about undersea cables. Where does this information travel? It's about having your products and services used by basically every European company. I speak for the European Union here as a European Parliament lawmaker. So that gives you a power to blackmail people, very simply. And now we see many of these companies teaming up with President Trump as basically their first lobbyist, who is asking the European Union very, very actively and threatening us with visa restriction, threatening us with sanctions, threatening us with tariffs, that we make a big exception for US companies that don't have to abide by our laws. So this is attacking sovereignty as such. This is taking away the sovereignty from the people. If we believe in our democracy, the sovereignty lies with the people. And what some of these tech companies, together with the Trump administration, are saying, no, we decide what you can do. We decide your regulation. We decide your legislation. We decide whether you can or cannot protect your people. And that is totally unacceptable. And the third point is, where does the added value go? It's the value extraction. I hope Tim will elaborate on that a little. Because the big promise is an increase in productivity. But where exactly is that increase in productivity? Is that really in the industrial production? Or is it more the possibility to have less workers you need to pay? In that case, those workers were paying taxes. Now they might need social services. So where does the added value go? Does it stay in Europe? Does it stay in the place where you employ the AI tool or the infrastructure? Or does it go to a different country and is not contributing to the welfare of the people living in that country? That are the big questions. On the other hand, what is the solution?
I think it is actively engaging in that space. I'm not only a lawmaker, I'm also a founder of the Eurostack initiative. That is a movement together with the industry to build a European digital infrastructure. And this is not about creating a wall around Europe. It's about breaking up those walled gardens, breaking up those monopolies, creating open standards, using open source software, creating a network of companies producing AI technologies, AI tools, and everything that goes with it, the infrastructure that goes with it, not only in Europe, but also all over the world by companies and jurisdictions that do not want to accept that power structure, but that want to keep that technology open and servicing the people and not just a few billionaires.
Thank you. Farida?
Okay. So for me, the whole of yesterday and the sessions, I felt very excluded because Africa wasn't mentioned at all in the conversation. And our problems, I mean, obviously things are a bit different for us, but we still have similar issues, especially when it comes to things like unconscious bias and all those things, when it comes to AI, because for instance, if you are looking at doing agentic AI where you are setting up a health monitoring system which would make recommendations on things like maternal health issues, most of the data is coming from the West. Most of the data being shown is coming from the West, it's not coming from Africa. So obviously the parameters and things will be different. So a couple of weeks ago, I was actually talking about why Africa needs to get more involved in the conversation. Because if not, what's going to happen is that things that will work for people in the West will be implemented for us, and it will not work because our parameters are different. And our social constructs, our cultural constructs will not come into play in the whole conversation. So it's very important that in Africa we also look at how can we contribute to this whole AI conversation. We are the second biggest planet, we are the second biggest continent in the world. We have the largest population of youth. So it's very important that we also play a major part in this whole thing. And we have similar problems when it comes to elections and misinformation and all those things, though not at the same scale as in the US or Europe, but we still have it. So, I mean, it's very important that we also get involved in the learning, in training the learning models and making sure that our data is represented within the learning models as well.
Thank you. So, as we're in the UK and have two Europeans on the panel, I'd love to turn to them to maybe answer a two-parter. That tension between regulating and innovation. We talk extensively about it in the United States. It's part of the reason that the right defends the lack of regulation for technology and that they believe it will stifle innovation and that it is a zero-sum black and white game. And we've seen cases in Europe that really prove that otherwise. And we have two experts here who have worked directly on various pieces of regulation in Europe. And so maybe we'll start with you, Alexandra. How did you approach the DSA and the AI Act when it comes to the right protections, but also not stifling innovation, or really responding to that argument that you're trading off against innovation in order to protect? And how do you respond to that with other members in Parliament and the kind of folks in the room? And then, Enma, you talked about this in your opening, but how do you think about that as far as when advising the Spanish leadership in navigating this issue?
Well, I contest that there's a trade-off between innovation and regulation. There's good regulation and there's bad regulation. And what we shouldn't do is bad regulation. I think that is the point. And just to make an example, I don't know if anybody has seen the Netflix series Dopesick. It's about the opioid crisis in the US, and there was this one scene where the Sackler family starts discussing, well, we should start doing this in Europe as well. We should get doctors to prescribe these opioids, highly addictive, one of the big causes of the opioid crisis. And then after like a minute, they rule it out because they realize that would never fly in Europe. It would just never work. Well, in the US, it was sufficient to buy the one single person signing off that from the FDA. This is why in the US, the number of drug-related deaths per 100,000 is 10 times higher than in Europe. It's because we have better regulation. So that's good regulation. I totally agree. In Europe, we have a lot of bad regulation. We have a lot of paperwork, and we should get rid of it. But let's look at what is good and what is bad. So what we did with the Digital Services Act, for example, we have different company sizes, basically. We look at how big is the company, is there a risk coming from that company? So for smaller and middle-sized companies, the obligations are very, very basic. And I really defy anybody to find a European company contesting the DSA on the basis that it's too much red tape. While we do have serious obligation for the very large online platforms, the ones with more than 45 million users in the European Union. That's like something like 20-25 companies. This is how you do good regulation. You look at what is really the risk and how can respond companies to that, and then you do targeted regulation really addressing that risk. This is how you need to do it.
Can I just add something?
Yes, please.
So when it comes to regulation, I'm a software engineer by profession, and you don't want to kill creativity. That is what regulation can do. It can kill creativity because then people will not be as innovative as they want to be, because they know that if something new is coming up, it could be subject to regulation, and it could be, the idea could be mixed from the beginning. So at the end of the day, there has to be a real balance, because the difference between the health industry and the technology industry is that with the health industry, you're just addressing one illness or one sickness or something. That is what you're solving. But with technology, the possibilities are endless. You don't know what can come out of anything. I mean, I can sit down to write something, then before I know it, I have come up with something that I didn't even think about. So if I have a regulatory body that is actually monitoring my work and telling me I can only do A and I cannot do B, then it would kill the creativity. So we have to strike a real balance, and I don't think we have been able to get it right up to now. That is why the social media platforms and things are largely unregulated, because where do you draw the line?
Thank you. Emma, turn it to you.
Regarding what we were saying in our yesterday's conversation, we have to link all this AI discussion with our will to protect our democracies. That's something that is super important. It's not only about individual rights that it is. It's also about how to keep safe our democracy. How can we prevent the attacks and intervention in our elections? How can we keep safe our people from all this deep fake news, where in the future, but it's not that far away, it's going to be super difficult to define what is real to what is not. So in that case, AI Act and all the legislation we've done in Spain, I think is crucial to protect what we have and stop being like, I don't know how to say it, like probably in a weak position. So there are some stats that says that in 2035, 58% of our jobs, of our employments, are going to be affected by AI. That's also an opportunity, because that could mean an increase of 8% on the GDP. That's really good. And it doesn't mean necessary to lose all that jobs, but only we are talking about improving the way that we work, like losing all these mechanical tasks that last us, and also a great opportunity to increase our productivity. For Spain, for the Spanish economy, for instance, that's a huge deal. But it needs, for instance, for trade unions, how to train all our people to embrace that technology without leaving it behind. It could be also a great opportunity to stop all this bureaucracy, to put together the administration and the citizens, because you have the opportunity to talk to the administration in your natural speaking, in your natural language. So you just talk with the machine and say, please, I need that. And it's going to be much easier and also quicker. So for that instance, that could be not only something that could be weak for democracy, but also a strengthen. And I think that's the point of view that we need to tackle, to embrace that opportunity and to avoid all the risks.
Tim, jumping off the economic incentives and impact on economy point, we talked a little bit yesterday about some of the kind of concentration of power and wealth beneficiaries being among the platforms and the LLM developers. Yeah. From your time in the Biden NEC and your forthcoming book, which we're all excited to read, how do you think about addressing those perverse incentives, right? We talked yesterday about how I spent time at the platforms, and they're set up in a way that will be able to change, really. And so how do you think about that, and what's your advice for this group as they navigate this?
Yeah, I think it dovetails with what was just spoken about as, this trade-off between growth and regulation. So I won't deny, I think it's fair to say that over-regulation can hurt growth. I don't want to lie about that. But there's a very big difference between that and making sure that the spoils of the wealth created are distributed more evenly than last time. What we let happen over the last 40 years is we allowed the tech platforms, which are undeniably convenient, essential, have become the platforms of our economy. We've let them become these extraction technologies that just take too much from the rest of the economy. And I think any mind towards AI policy has to, as you said, embrace technological advance as a means of generating wealth, but at the same time, make sure that we have a technology that is infrastructural, that is building for the whole economy. I think progressives need a build agenda, but it needs to be a build agenda that just doesn't say, oh, those guys, those 4 companies are going to build our future and take all the money. It has to be, how are these AI platforms, how is this kind of infrastructure, maybe like the railroads, maybe like electricity, going to support a lot of other economic activity? That is the kind of build agenda I think progressives can get behind. I think progressives need to harness the power of AI. I mean, this is an incredible time to build things. This is a period where there's all kinds of possibilities. We should, there is this opportunity for flourishing, for countries to build different kind of companies than ever before, kind of the original promise of the internet. And the question is the kind of policies government takes to allow the entire economy to build, as opposed to hoping a few companies are going to build the whole future for us and take all the money.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One of the themes that I think came through there and that has come up yesterday extensively is on messaging and how the left, I think, can candidly do better than we have been historically. Alexandra, what is your, we chatted in the working group yesterday, what is your advice or your thought on how we can really scale a smaller number of succinct messages across the progressive movement? How would you advise this group to do that effectively if you were given the chance, which you are in your position?
Well, to do that in a second. I think it's important to challenge that dominant narrative, like, for example, innovation versus regulation, and say innovation is what serves the people and the planet. That is, for example, I think a message we could all agree on in the progressive spectrum. and try to bring that message everywhere, and then have people, telling you what exactly does that mean. For me, it means as a European lawmaker, it means we support European industry, we support European companies. I mean, we are supposed to be the progressives who don't necessarily accept the status quo. Who has said that 5 companies would control all this AI power structure? We can build something else. I mean, Taiwan has shown how to do that. India is showing how to do that. Why shouldn't we do that and support that effort as progressive to create a more distributed form of power where everybody can harness the potential of artificial intelligence, but we also have the democratic power as legislators to protect the people from the harms, and we're already seeing the harms. I think that is a common message. Artificial intelligence really needs to benefit the people, and in order to benefit the people, we need a lot of companies working on it in a very networked way. It needs to be open, it needs to be transparent, and let's do this together.
Thank you. Farida, you had really good points about bringing the Global South into the conversation more prominently. And that's something really a priority for global progress as well, in really uniting the perspectives on AI and on progressive issues more broadly. How can we, as progressives, do a better job of incorporating the importance and the feedback and the prominence of the rising Global South, and how technology impacts the Global South maybe in different ways than it does other countries? How can we do better at incorporating that perspective?
So I think we need to engage a lot more with African tech companies, as well as the governments. They are very important, because we have a similar problem as she just said, because of where the data is. Data is the most expensive commodity these days. But if you have data, you have everything. Our data is being housed within these 5 big tech companies. We have no control over it. So I think I've been advocating for Africa to have its own data centers where we can house our data, where we can train our own data models, so that we will not be reliant on information from the US or wherever, because it's scary knowing that your whole infrastructure and everything is being housed in a country or in a region which if today they decide they are going to cut you off, you're screwed. So it's very important that you come and you listen to us. Because for too long, the West has been telling us what to do, instead of asking us, how do you want us to help you? The conversation has to change from do this to we are partners. How can we work together to make the world a better place?
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's time. So unfortunately, we have to wrap it. But a round of applause for our panelists. All right. So thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Well, our next session takes us to one of the defining challenges of our time. That's migration. The UN estimates that more than 120 million people worldwide have been forced from their homes. While most are hosted in low and middle income countries, irregular migration into Europe and the US has reshaped politics, fueling populism and really testing democracies. The question for progressives is whether we can manage this scale of displacement in ways that reassure citizens at home while staying true to their values. On the next panel today, we've got Peter Hammelgaard, Denmark's Minister of Justice from the Social Democrats, Diego Rubio, Director of the Cabinet of the Prime Minister of Spain, Dan Restrepo, Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress, He's also a former advisor to President Barack Obama. Frank Sherry, founder and chief executive of America's Voice, long a leading advocate for immigration reform in the US. And guiding this conversation, we have Christabel Cooper, director of research at Labour Together. Thank you. Over to you, Christabel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Welcome everyone to this panel on migration. It is entitled Migration, the Global Governance Challenge of Our Time, and I don't think that that is an exaggeration. Within the last few days, US President Donald Trump has told the UN it is time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. Your countries are going to hell. And yet, whether Donald Trump likes it or not, we are living in an era of mass displacement. The UN currently estimates that more than 120 million people worldwide have been forced from their homes. While it's low and middle income countries that host the vast majority of those people, irregular migration into Europe and into the United States has disrupted our politics. It has fueled the populist right, and it is placing a strain on our democracies. So the challenge for the centre-left is to find a way to manage this scale of displacement that takes into account the concerns of existing populations in our countries, but which also seeks to maximise the contributions that migrants can bring and remains true to our socially democratic values. We've got a brilliant panel here. I think you guys have already been introduced, so I won't go through that again. Though I would just like to add a special thanks to Lasse Ryberg from Denmark, who has stood in at the last moment. As many of you may be aware, the Danish delegation, much of it has not been able to arrive due to what we can only assume is Russian aggression in closing Copenhagen airport at the moment. So big thanks to Lasse for standing in. And I will come to Lasse first. At the Danish general election in 2022, the governing Social Democrats achieved their best result in 20 years, while the hard-right Danish People's Party gained 3% of the vote. Yeah, absolutely. A rare success for the centre-left over the hard-right at a time when migration is such a prominent issue in our politics. Would you be able to just give us an overview of the approach that the Danish government has taken with regard to migration, both in terms of the policy and in terms of the narrative that you were trying to get across to voters?
Yeah, I will certainly try to do that and maintain the focus on an overview and not a historical run-through. But it's important to know the political history in Denmark in terms of immigration to understand why we are at the point we are now. I mean, we all concur that we live in troubling times with war, instability, and we are seeing right-wing party taking power in numerous countries around the world. So therefore, it has been very important to us to be in sync with our population. There are no easy solutions. Often in our progressive family, we have this mantra saying, when they go low, we go high. We would say, when they go low, we need to go relevant. This is a question about relevance without losing your fundamental ideological aspects. Already 30 or 40 years ago, we were warned as a party by a lot of our Danish, a lot of our local mayors. They were saying they experienced that immigration was getting out of hand. It created a lack of social coherency, and the balances were simply off. We struggled with that debate, those policies, for decades internally in our party. In 2001, we lost power. We lost the election primarily due to immigration issues and issues of crime. So all until we had some years in government during Helle Thorning-Schmidt, but it was not such a great success in those terms. In 2018, we had a new leader, Mrs. Frederiksen, and she set out a new course, a new comprehensive policy in terms of immigration and integration in our country. And our analysis was that we needed to pivot on these subjects in order to get permission from a lot of the voters we have lost during all of those years we were out of government. We had a lot of policy propositions that were a good thing for them in terms of pension age, early retirement, expanding welfare, but they simply weren't listening to us because of our earlier positions on immigration and integration. And one other thing, and that's hard to choose, but the aspect of being authentic on this subject cannot be understated. Mrs. Frederiksen, she usually says that voters can spot if you are talking about a firm stance on immigration while you're crossing your fingers on your back. They can sniff it out, so you actually have to mean it, and that's a harder thing to. You cannot choose that. You must own it in your heart. Yeah. All right. But in our 2018 pivoting policy, we had clear goals. We need secure borders. We needed to protect our young girls in Denmark from social control within their families. We need to increase and secure social coherency in public areas of public social housing. We need to protect the wages set up in collective bargaining. We had an ambition of bringing down or contributing at least to bring down the numbers of casualty in the Mediterranean, all the refugees and the migrants crossing the Mediterranean. And we are a small country, 6 million inhabitants with high benefits. And when you arrive in Denmark legally, as a migrant, as a refugee, you instantly get benefits. So of course we also need to maintain some kind of balance in terms of numbers. So with focus on responsibility and rights, we set a new course. Just to point out some of the actual policies, we raised the legal marrying age for non-citizens. We are seeking to establish centers for refugees in countries outside the EU. We've pushed for more deportations when people are convicted for violent crimes. And we are actually relocating people, both immigrants and Danes, from the most burdened social public housing areas in order to gain social coherency, in order to re-establish those balances. And as said before, the Danish People's Party, they were at 22% in 10 years ago, and now they came out with 3.5% the last election. And the last thing I would like to say in this round is that we have both enacted hard policies, firm policies, restriction policies, but we are also pursuing a lot of the things that we usually stamp being progressive. We are at 7.7% in 0.7% in foreign aid. We are respecting and upholding international treaties. We are pushing for further deals with bordering countries. We are offering housing and benefits for those who are legally in our country, and we are enacting more anti-racism and anti-discriminatory legislation. So we are quite resolute in our firm policies, but we are also doing a lot of the things that we usually call progressives. But of course, or not of course, we are maybe communicating the firm stances more than all the traditional progressive things in order to maintain this permission with the voters to talk about them, to talk to them about a lot of the other things we want to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, please.
So a year after the Danish elections, the Spanish Social Democrats PSOE also won re-election with an increased share of the vote, and the hard-right party Vox losing both vote share and seats. And in case we were tempted to think that there might just be one simple, straightforward winning formula for centre-left parties on migration, PSOE approached the issue quite differently. So, Diego, could you take us through the Spanish government's approach to migration?
Yes. So, at the Spanish government, we know that it's important to connect with citizens' beliefs. but not when that makes you deploy the wrong policies. Our migration strategy is based on 4 principles. The first principle is that we have a moral and legal duty towards migrants because they're human beings, regular or irregular. This sounds basic, but nowadays, unfortunately, we keep saying it. They're human beings. The second principle is that you cannot stop migration. Maybe in the short term, if you invest a lot of resources, but never in the long term, because our forests, our deserts, our oceans are too big. And the need of those fleeing from violence or poverty is too high. So you will never stop it. That's why we believe that every single pound you invest in trying to stop migrants, you're wasting it. You should devote that money to canalize, to channel migration properly. The third principle, maybe one of the most important ones, is that all those studies published in the 60s and the 70s about the world going overcrowded were completely rubbish. This idea that by mid-century there will be too much people in the world so we won't have a space or water for them are completely flawed. The reality is that most countries, in Europe certainly, are underpopulated and that they're going to lose millions of inhabitants in the coming decades because of demographic aging. And the reality as well, and this can be proof, is that even nowadays, one of the main engines of growth for our economic models is demographic growth. If you look at Europe over the past decade alone, was more than 25% of our economic growth was driven by demographic growth. So what we believe, and AI is not going to change that, by the way. So what we believe is that in 10, 20, 30 years from now, we will look backwards and we will see 2 kinds of developed countries. Those who remain close, they will go stagnant. They will struggle to, with deficit and debt. They will struggle to keep their welfare state alive, and life for everybody will be worse. And those who remain open, they will remain growing economies, and therefore they will be able to keep their welfare states alive. And there's the fourth principle or idea, which is that we are seeing a lot of people buying the framework of the far right when they forget or ignore the fact that most of the problems that we tend to link to migration are not caused by migration, are not caused by the nationality, the religion, or the color skin of the people, are caused by poverty, inequality, lack of prospects, lack of education. So where you need to solve those problems is not to follow the far-right agenda and say we have too many migrants here. What you have to do is to invest in public services, in welfare state, because in housing, that's how you're going to really solve the problems for all the migrants and for your local citizens. This is the way we see it. And by the way, it's working. It is working.
Thank you for that. Dan Restrepo, I'd like to turn now to talk about some of the countries that are really dealing with the sharp end of mass displacement of people. Around 8 million Venezuelans have left their country over the last decade, and around 3 million of those are currently in Colombia alone. So these are huge numbers. For context, around 6 million people have fled from Syria, with about 1 million people from Syria across the whole of Europe. So Dan Restrepo, how did countries like Colombia deal with this mass displacement without losing political consent?
And I think it's important to look at Colombia's experience and Latin America's experience. As I know, when we look at migration in the Americas from a U.S. perspective, we spend a great deal of time focused on the 15 to 20% of the migration that actually gets to the United States. And we spend far less time understanding how a region has dealt with the other 80 to 85%. And as you rightly note, Colombia is today, so a country of 40 million people has received 3 million Venezuelans And the other 5 million that have left Venezuela in the last decade at least passed through, almost all of them passed through Colombia. So migration is very much a day-to-day reality in countries in the global south. And I think to look at what Colombia has done, and this is obviously not my story to tell, and it, quite frankly, from a political perspective, would have been more compelling, I think, from the person who was supposed to be in this seat, who is the former mayor of Barranquilla, Colombia, Jaime Pumarejo, who unfortunately couldn't join us at the last moment. And Jaime's story, from a political perspective, is a very interesting one. So during his time as mayor of Barranquilla, which is the largest Colombian city closest to the Venezuelan border, his city's population grew by 10% in a 5-year period of time, all fueled by migration. And at the end of Jaime's term in office, he left office as the most popular mayor in Colombia. We normally think that that kind of disruption, that kind of influx, it would be political death to whomever was there to have to manage it. But it wasn't for a guy like Jaime, and it wasn't for Claudia Lopez in Bogotá and other mayors. And the reason it wasn't, I think, is twofold. Is they understood, both at a national level and a local level, the importance of providing legal authorization for folks to work. So the movement from being a fiscal and social burden, migrants quickly became fiscal contributors. Colombia's working population today is somewhere between 3 and 4 years younger than it was a decade ago in a country that was aging naturally. So there's a huge fiscal benefit that has come to the reduced age in the workforce driven by migration. And they allowed that to be tapped into by providing legal status. And the other is what I call a host community. They took a host community approach to managing migration. Understanding that the social and fiscal burden falls on local communities where migrants arrive. And they decided to support the communities rather than just or even principally the migrants who were arriving. So you weren't fueling social tension by providing, quote unquote, special benefits to the new residents of Barranquilla or Bogotá, but rather to the communities that were becoming their new homes. And obviously, if you're supporting those communities, you are also supporting their new residents. But doing that together, I think, allowed kind of a social permission structure to take hold, and allowed folks, again, to become new residents of those communities, and to become contributors to those communities in a way that is, again, it's not perfect. Xenophobia is present in Colombia and elsewhere in the Americas, but has been tempered in a moment, in a decade, where you have seen unprecedented mobility in the Americas, because again, 25 to 30% of global mobility is taking place in Latin America and the Caribbean, which is home to only 8% of the world's population.
Thank you. I think that's so interesting, talking about contribution and support for communities as key to kind of buying political consent for really those absolutely extraordinary number of migrants that Latin America is hosting at the moment. So, Frank Sherry.
Hello.
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 Immigration has been cited as one of the major reasons behind Donald Trump's victory in the presidential election. And yet it's a very widely underappreciated fact that under the Biden-Harris administration, encounters with migrants at the US-Mexico border fell from a peak of 250,000 per month in December 2023 down to 30,000 a month by the time that Biden left office. You worked on the Harris campaign. Can you take us through that sort of extraordinary fact that, you know, firstly, how did the administration achieve those numbers and yet not get political credit for it, Frank? I'm not blaming you, honestly.
Everybody want to watch heartbreak happen as we speak. The President Biden got the politics and policy of immigration wrong for 3.5 years. And by the time the Biden administration got it right, not so much because of him, but because of policy officials at the senior level who got together and cracked the code. So what they did is they combined meaningful international cooperation from Mexico and other countries in the Americas. Dan had a big role in that. They also made it very hard for people to cross the border illegally, to apply for asylum, so that they weren't just let into the country and put into 7-year backlogs, meaning they were never going to be removed. And they expanded legal pathways so that people could apply for refugee and humanitarian visas. The combination undermined the business model of the smugglers. It made much more sense for a Venezuelan to apply for a humanitarian visa, fly in an airplane into America, be met by a sponsor, and have work permission, than to pay $10,000 to go to the border, be turned away, and be unable to get into the United States under law for years. So the incentive structure shifted. And so I give credit to the White House officials who got it right. I don't think President Biden actually kind of got this issue instinctually, and it's a big problem. But I think we can learn something from it. Look, I've worked on this issue for 40 years in a variety of capacities, now as a think tanker, which is new to me. I think it means I can say whatever the hell I want. But the things that work, at least in an American context, are that you've got to take the issue seriously because the voters take the issue seriously. It's not just a right-wing issue. It's an issue for it was the number 2 issue in the election. And so when President Biden didn't want to talk about it because his advisors said it'll increase the salience of the issue, it's a Republican issue, stay away from it, that ceded the narrative turf to Trump and the Republicans to define the issue. It was the Biden border crisis. It was the Democrats are the party of open borders. And with no countervailing contesting narrative, that took hold among many voters. And while inflation and cost of living was the main issue in the election, the late-breaking voters, the swing voters who decided late, they favored Trump over Harris on immigration and border security by 42 points. So we end up with an authoritarian using an immigration crackdown as the edge of the spear in his authoritarian project, rather than having a sensible policy that comports with where most Americans are. So here are the 3 things that I think for America to get, for the center left to get immigration right, you've got to take the issue seriously. That's not to say make it the only issue, but don't pretend it's not an issue. I think we'll see an example of the next speaker showing that in the UK they're taking it seriously. They're leaning in. All right? Number 2, you've got to solve the problem. All the messaging in the world doesn't work if you don't have a serious solution. And again, credit to the folks who brought solutions to bear in year 4 of the Biden administration, but it was too late to make an electoral difference. The majority of Americans want a balanced policy. This is what the contours of the debate are often a mobilized right slinging simplistic slogans to mobilize fear and hate, and dare I say, a shouty left advocating for maximalist demands that make the debate seem in the public mind as it's all or nothing. If it's a debate between all or nothing, nothing is going to win.
Every time.
If it's a debate between nothing, fear and hate, simplistic solutions, scapegoating and xenophobia, and a balanced approach that says we're going to be a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws, we're going to make illegal immigration work and work to sharply reduce illegal immigration, that's where the majority of people are. Americans aren't anti-immigrant, they're anti-chaos. And the border chaos drove Trump's electoral advantage in a way that really hurt Kamala Harris's campaign. So, and I learned so much yesterday by talking in some of our small group work with the Danes and the Spanish and the Swedes and the Australians. Every country has a different authentic story. But your authentic story has to be the basis for how you talk about this. In America, we're not an open borders country. We're a country that has long celebrated legal immigration and tried to deter illegal immigration. And when we tell that story of we're a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws, that's not some sort of tawdry trade-off. That is a statement of values. In fact, the best way to be either is to be both. They work together, because when we have more control at our borders, we have more generosity for expanded legal pathways. So I think that the center-left has to find its voice on this in a way that is not intimidated by the left, not cowed by the right, and it is not aping either narrative. It's a center-left narrative that says we can solve this problem in a way, we can manage this problem in a way that reflects our values and serves our interests.
Thank you, Frank. We've just got a couple of minutes left. I'm just going to very quickly ask Diego and Lasse. Centre-left parties tend to struggle with immigration because they're often trying to hold together a coalition of older working-class voters with socially conservative views, and often younger, more educated voters with socially liberal views. So if just like 1 minute on how you've held that coalition together with the immigration policy that you have in Spain.
You know, I totally get your points about this is an issue, so don't try to ignore it. But at the same time, I think one of the mistakes we're making in many places is that we're buying the idea that this is the only topic. So we are limiting the whole debate on this, and this one of the effects that it has is it makes you forget how aligned you are in other issues with your allies, right? So I guess one of the ideas is keeping a coalition together is not easy, but we've been the first coalition government in the history of Spain, actually. And I guess the golden rule is start making friends among the ranks of the other parties, and then never lose focus of the things that unite you, and don't focus only on the things that divide you. And then, you know, in our case, as we were talking before, we have the luck that the opposition makes things much easier many days. So.
Thank you, Diego. And Lasse, very quickly.
Very quickly, I don't know. We are not one of those parties or governments who feel that this is the only issue. We've tried to and been able to mostly to neutralize this subject. The vast majority of the Danish voters are behind us, and there's a big majority in Parliament who supports these policies. So when we were a one-party government from 19 to 22, relying on the left on all other issues, they accepted that fact, and so they didn't overthrow the government due to their disagreement on those policies. And now we are in a coalition government with parties who also agree with this point. So I would say and immigration is not only a financial thing. A major part of a vast part of our fiscal surplus comes from migrant workers from Eastern European countries. We welcome them, they behave, they work, they respect the law of the land. There's no problem in saying that, and we also do that. But if you are classical progressive and you tend to focus too much on the fiscal things, the redistribution, the financial things, but what about minimum wage? What about social coherency? You need to attend to all those factors if you don't want to lose the majority of the voters.
Thank you. So I think my conclusion is that centre-left parties do not have to be powerless in the face of this issue. We've got different political situations in different countries, and the answers will be different in all of those countries. But I think you made an excellent point right at the beginning that whatever the solution, the government needs to be authentic. They need to make clear choices that are in line with the values that they feel authentically comfortable with advocating. And I think, if they do that, they can both shape conditions on the ground and be able to influence the political narrative and be able to give an answer to Donald Trump's challenge. So I'd just like to thank our excellent panel, and can we have a round of applause, please?
Thank you so much to our morning panelists. They've been really, really insightful. Well, we're now going to take a very quick reset, and we'll be back in a few minutes. So make the most of this time. Thank you.
So in this context, the most valuable resource is imagination, is new ideas, is being bold and confident and making distinctly progressive arguments about what the world needs now and why we have the answers to the challenges people face. And so I hope what you'll see on stage here today is a host of leaders and thinkers and activists who are making those arguments, who are doing the hard work. And I hope that we will be part of a conversation that helps define what comes next. Before I step away, you're going to see a host of amazing stars on stage here today, but the real stars are those that have managed to put this conference on, and they're backstage, downstairs right now, making sure that we're all here and that we're able to have this conversation. So I want to say thank you to all of the teams from CAP, from IPPR and Labour Together who've made this happen, and in particular, they won't be here to hear me say this because they're all busy, but Jess, Aleri, Ollie, Rhiannon and Ali have done an amazing job in making this happen, so they're the real stars of the show here today. Thank you all, I hope you have a great day, and I'm going to hand back over to Alita.
Welcome again, everyone. Now we're moving on to our next session on the AI dilemma. AI, of course, is not just about technology or the revolutionaries around it. It's about power, democracy, and whether people can trust that progress won't leave them behind. So on our panel today, we have Alexandra Geese, member of the European Parliament who helped shape the EU's landmark Digital Services Act. We have also got Farida Bedway, a Ghanaian entrepreneur and disability advocate whose fintech innovations have brought digital banking to thousands. We also have Emma Lopez Araujo, Spain's Federal Secretary for Economic Policy and Digital Transformation, leading efforts to embed AI in industrial strategy. We also have Tim Wu, a Columbia law professor. He's visiting Oxford, and he's a former White House advisor and the thinker who coined net neutrality. And guiding the conversation, we have Megan Shahi from the Center for American Progress. Over to you, Megan.
Good morning. Can folks hear me? Yeah. Awesome. Well, I hope everyone is sufficiently caffeinated and ready for this conversation. I get the great honor of kicking off our public programming for the day, so thank you all for being here. The session title is The AI Dilemma, Governing for a Digital Future. And I think we're at a really pivotal moment in society as progressives, and really at the intersection of democracy and the choice on choosing democracy going forward for our future, and the advent of technology, particularly with the way generative AI and AI has really come onto the scene and blown up in a very big way. And so today I'm honored to be guiding this conversation. I'm surrounded on all sides by the real experts, who I'll introduce in a minute. But the big question we're really seeking to answer here is, how do we govern AI as progressives in a way that protects people, strengthens the economy, and simultaneously prevents and mitigates the far-right authoritarian regime and the risks to the way we really see AI thriving in the future, and how to manage those risks and also simultaneously manage the opportunities, of which there are many. So with that, I will introduce our panelists and we'll get things started. So to my right, we have MEP Alexandra Giza, hailing from Germany. Ms. Giza is a leading digital policymaker within the European Greens, who played a key role in developing the EU's Digital Services Act, or DSA. She sits on the Industry, Budget, Internal Market, and Women's Rights Committees in the European Parliament and is a prominent voice on international and social issues. To her right is Farida Bedwi. Ms. Bedwi is a leading tech entrepreneur who co-founded Logicel Limited and pioneered the development of GCoody, a cloud-based banking platform now widely used by microfinance institutions across Ghana. She's on the board of Ghana's National Communications Authority, previously worked as a principal software engineer at Microsoft, and is currently a platform product consultant at Digital Opportunity Trust, where she's part of the team building and managing digital systems that support innovation and youth engagement across Africa. To my left, we have Enma Lopez. Ms. Lopez is the Spanish Federal Secretary for Economic and Digital Transformation and deputy spokesperson of the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party. She's advised successive prime ministers and has been central to setting the country's strategy on economic, industrial, and digital issues. And lastly, on the far left for me is Tim Wu. Tim is a professor at Columbia Law School, the former special assistant to President Biden for technology and competition policy in the Biden-Harris administration, and now visiting at Oxford. He coined the phrase net neutrality in 2003 in the White House and was hailed as the architect of the administration's anti-monopoly agenda. Lastly, he authored the forthcoming book, The Age of Extraction: How Tech Platforms Conquered the Economy and Threatened Our Future Prosperity. So with that, quite the bios. We'll dive right in, wasting no time. So I will open with a high-level question that I would love all our panelists to really start with. Enma, we'll start over with you. What is the biggest challenge that progressives, folks in the room and out of the room, face in governing AI? And how do we tackle that challenge in a way that not just doesn't just consider policymakers, but also considers people?
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for giving us this amazing opportunity to talk about probably one of the key topics of these times. From my perspective, the big deal is not falling into the false dilemma between advancing and regulating. They are not opposite, and in our perspective, they must be together. Why so? Because if we have rules in the real life, why don't we have that in the digital life? Do we really want the digital life to become some kind of the Far West? We don't. But actually, we cannot deny the advance. We need to embrace it. And to embrace it, we have also to create public policies that doesn't leave anyone behind. That has been on the mind of the Spanish government during all those years. For us, it's very important not only to create like the material conditions for AI to develop, for instance, 5G in almost the full territory of Spain, but also this high-speed velocity worldwide. It's right now in the 95% of our territory, but also giving grants to all these small companies. The 95% of our companies are really, really small. We call it pymes. And giving them the opportunity to also embrace that technology. And also we're talking about rights. We have passed this digital act with rights, and not only we've created an agency to protect and to preserve all those rights. We are talking about digital disconnection, we are talking about neutrality, we are talking about things that in real life are so clear, but they must be also in the digital life. So as a sum up, that could be that we need to embrace it, we need to regulate it, and we need to advance in that sovereignty, not only in language, that of course is important, but also in terms of chips, in terms of semiconductors, in terms of all these algorithms and the data that is going to rule the next years of our lives.
Thank you. Tim, we'll turn to you.
Sure, thank you. It's great to be here. I think this conference has been great and very inspirational and motivating, so thank you again for having me on this panel and being here in general. I think the rise of artificial intelligence does pose significant challenges for the progressive movement, and I'll say why. I think it's very important for progressives that we remain a movement that is serious about the future, serious about growth, optimism, building an economy, and no one wants to be in the country that's left behind.
Exactly.
On the other hand, I think we do have to learn from some of the lessons of the last revolution, of the internet revolution itself. The promise in that time, I'm thinking back to the 90s and the early thousands, is that the internet was going to make everybody rich. It was very simple. Didn't matter where you go. Geography was no longer going to matter. Doesn't matter where you were, everybody was going to make it. Because you could work from home, you could invent an app, you could do this, you could do that, you could do this. 30 years later, we look back, and in fact, there was an acceleration of the process of winner regions and loser regions that was accelerated by the internet. And when you think about it, what happened was that mainly the returns went to the platforms, mainly in the United States, mainly on the coasts. And the rest of the world, and where I live or lived in most of the United States, got a lot of great stuff, was able to buy things quickly and so forth, but didn't reap the same kind of returns. And so I think as the AI revolution goes forward, I think we have to have that example in mind. And we have to think about a kind of building that builds the entire economy, not at the expense of parts of the economy. Frankly, I think voters are attuned to this. I mean, voters are more skeptical of AI than they are of the internet. People are just actively worried about having their jobs replaced. So I think thinking through the economics is really important. I don't think we should want our countries or our regions to become satellites of Silicon Valley, economic satellites of Silicon Valley, nor do I think you want a situation where that you're competing with tax breaks or whatever you can to try to beg for little crumbs of investment.